Hey, Future Glenn here. I wanted to note before we get started on this episode that we recorded this episode prior to the announcement of Bernard Cribbin's death at the age of 93. We wanted to obviously pay our respects and honor the British actor who has had roles in Doctor Who, of course, as Wilfred Mott, and then in the 1960s movie Dalek Invasion Earth 2150 AD. And of course, we want to look back on his career and discuss that. But I want to let you know that we're going to do that probably on a later show. But I wanted to give you a heads up that we are aware, and that's why it's not discussed in this episode. So I'll turn this back over to our past selves.
Traveling the Vortex.
Join the most wonderful man in the universe as he travels the vortex and arrives at episode 526. I'm Keith.
I'm Sean.
I'm Glenn.
How's it going, guys?
Did you think one of us was going to do it this time?
Well, you started last time when we had a false start, so I thought we'd do the same thing again.
Pregnant pause.
Oh, I thought Sean was going to say he was pregnant.
That would be huge news.
Doing good. You guys do anything this week exciting? Nothing? Did you watch any movies or play any games or anything?
I finished a book.
Ooh, what'd you finish?
Shadow of the Sith. That's that Luke Skywalker, Lando Calrissian adventure set between trilogies. And it was okay. The sad thing is the most interesting parts of the book are when they don't connect to Rise of Skywalker in the slightest.
I was about to ask a really dumb question and ask, which trilogies is it between? And then my brain caught up to me and went, wait, no, don't ask that question.
It is the book that's meant to allegedly fix some of Last Jedi, or Rise of Skywalker.
All it really does is elaborate on what Lando talks about of what he and Luke were doing, and justifies how Rey's parents were on that ship when it didn't really need to be justified, in my opinion.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's a large chunk of it where they have Rey with them, and it just feels wrong. Like, this entire story about them should have happened after they left her at Jakku, instead of her being with them almost the entire time. There's just a lot about it that didn't quite set well. And I even went back and rewatched Rise of Skywalker to see if, it kind of fixed a lot of those issues I had. And it just fills in those gaps. I mean, it's kind of the equivalent of, I think I talked about Brotherhood and how that was a good story, but it was, filling in a story based off of one line. This feels like some of that, but a little more than one line.
Interesting.
Wow, you rewatched Rise of Skywalker. That's
it's a movie that has good moments into it.
I was going to say I've watched Rise of Skywalker a few times. I don't dislike it. It has its issues, but it's a good movie. I mean, I enjoy it. I enjoy it for the fan service for most part, but I like it. It's an enjoyable film.
It's Star Wars.
Yeah, it's an enjoyable film. It's not one I return to frequently, but it is one that I've watched. I've probably sat down and watched it in its entirety probably 5 times total since it came out.
Yeah,
this was probably my 4th view, maybe 3rd.
I went to the theater and saw it a second time, and I was so bored halfway through that I just was kind of like, ugh. And I bought it when it came out because I'm a completist and I have to have them, but I haven't been able to rise get the gumption to put it back in. I'm just kind of like, and I agree with you. There are sequences that I genuinely like, but then there are so many missteps in it that just anger me. And it's like, no, I don't want to be angry at Star Wars. I don't want to be that fan. So it's better to just keep it on the shelf and leave it alone.
Fake
And
fan,
actually-
fake fan.
The book actually creates another plot hole in the movie.
Oh, nice.
Because the stupid knife that, they use to see, here's where we have to go on the Death Star,
Right.
is supposedly an ancient Sith knife. So how would it have any of the Death Star stuff tied to it? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
I'm sure Palpatine was standing over the engineering, design blueprint guys. What's it? Architect shoulders. Going,
When this
okay,
star
I want this
station
to look
crashes
like
on
this.
this planet, so it's got to look. I know it's going to crash this way, so it's got to have this weird hook thingy on it.
Yeah.
And this inscription on it.
Well, wasn't it to find the throne room, though? And I think just the mere presence of two Sith in that throne room was probably enough for it to hone in. That would be my explanation for it.
But it didn't use like Sith wayfinding stuff. It was literally a thing you took out of the hilt that helped you point and find the throne room.
It was like the Goonies doubloon. You lined up the rocks and hey, there it is.
If it was like using like force sense Sith, stuff more than a physical thing that you extract, I could be okay with that too.
Oh, okay. Oh, we've talked way too far long on this. Sean, did you watch anything or read anything this week?
I've just kept up on our regular shows. The Orville continues to get better and better and better, which is saying something because it's been so consistently good this season. We're up to the break on Stranger Things, and I am legit concerned for Steve. It's a good time to be a geek. I'm falling behind on my movies because we've had so much good TV to watch.
You're not being a very good geek because you're way far behind to the rest of us.
Yeah, I know. Well, like I said, I'm watching with friends, and we get one a week.
We're gonna take your geek card away.
Hey, believe me, if it were up to me, I'd have mainlined this stuff already. And Mel and I have talked about it.
That's the difference. Had it been me, I would have, and then gone back and watched it again with my friends.
Just rewatched it.
Yeah,
we've talked about it. We've looked at each other and gone, "Okay, they're off the phone. Should we just go ahead and Zoom call has ended? Should we just go ahead and plow forward?" But I'm also a terrible actor, and I have the short films to prove it, so I don't think I could act surprised. Oh, wow, who saw that coming? Not I. But and then Monday came, and wow, that was a 1-2 gut punch, if ever there was one.
Well, are we going to launch into news then, or that was at the top of my news list?
Yeah, unless you want to talk about what you did, because I'm not sure.
Oh, I didn't. I did not have anything that I did that was worth talking about.
Well, then let's do the 10 o'clock news.
Yeah. Well, see, you said 1-2 gut punch, and I'm assuming Sorvino must have been the other one for you.
Sorvino was the other one.
Okay,
yeah.
I didn't. That one didn't affect me because I haven't. I was saddened by the man's death, but I'm not that familiar with anything that made me, endeared to the man. So I didn't really have that. Now, David Warner was one of those ones that it hit me more than I expected it to, because I've never been like a huge David Warner fan. Like I love the guy, I love the movies that he's been in, but I've never been kind of that guy who's like, oh, David Warner, I'm going to try and watch everything he's in, so it really was surprising that day when, as saddened as I was by it, because I thought, wow. But I think it's because it kind of washes back over you all of the things that he is in that I do enjoy. And I sort of realized that I liked his work even better than I knew I did, because I now was forced to go back and look at his catalog of things that he did. And that made me miss him even more, because I thought, well, this is it now. This is all we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Sean and I have been on record on our love for David Warner, so I think our sadness is probably understated.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was a combination, because I'm with Keith. I mean, I absolutely love David Warner, and he's just one of those actors that every time he shows up in something, it's like, oh, sweet, David Warner's in this.
Instantly made a film better.
Yeah, and he has so much geek credit. You know, when you look at Tron and Time After Time and Titanic and Time Bandits, and I mean, just the list goes on and
All the
on and on
Star
and on
Trek.
and on. All the Star
Star
Treks.
Trek's
I mean,
The Omen.
3 different Star Trek credits for Pete's sake. And
What was his third one? Because I know he was the Klingon in the 6th film. He was the zealot in the second film. He wasn't a zealot. He was one of the guys that fell under the spell of what's his name?
the Federation ambassador in Star Trek 5.
Yes.
And then he's the Cardassian interrogator in Next Gen, the one that the Picard meme with there are 4 lights. He's the one that keeps saying, if you say there's 5, I'll let you go.
I forgot that he was in that.
And I mean, he's the nerdy scientist in Secret of the Ooze.
Yeah, that's probably the first thing I ever saw him in.
I think that's what's fascinated me the most about his career, is I think a lot of guys that come out of the UK and move to the United States to be a movie star kind of pick up, a majority of them, not all of them, but a majority of them, at least the old school actors from, I would say, from probably 70 on to the early 2000s, they sort of took on that persona of, especially once they became in big films, that's all the parts they took. That's kind of, they felt like other jobs might be below them. What surprises me so much about David Warner is you can tell David Warner acted because he loved to act, because he would take anything. And I'm not saying he would take roles that were necessarily, beneath him or, he didn't take roles for the sake of taking roles like somebody like Nicolas Cage might, but nothing was beneath him as far if he liked it, wanted to be in it, or maybe was interested in the story, or he seems like a very humble man when you look back at the breadth of work that he did do, and as you say, he could have been in really kind of anything after Tron and after the Star Trek films all day, and he wasn't really even like the character actor type, although he was a lead actor that kind of was a character actor as well, which I think is kind of fascinating about him as well. But he seemed like a humble man because he would really just kind of work to work. He worked because he enjoyed working.
Well, there's so much stuff that like I when I initially watched it didn't know it was him, like Ra's al Ghul in Batman the Animated Series, or the fact that he was in Freakazoid. He was the voice of the Lobe.
He was the Lobe.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't watch Freakazoid that much.
Voice stuff that he did, that it's like, wow, he did that too. It's just incredible.
He's the narrator in Pooh's Grand Adventure.
I knew that.
Christopher Robin.
I knew that.
Yeah, so much stuff. And I think for me, what hurts is he was one of those actors that I kind of had always, I mean, aside from having him up on this pedestal, I'd always envisioned meeting him at a con. There wasn't any doubt in my mind that was going to happen. Mel and I had already talked about it. It was like, God, what are you going to have him sign? It was like, well, I'd have to put together a collage. I mean,
there's so many things,
too much stuff. And so it was just kind of there. And I know that he, had done L.I. Who that one year, and we just couldn't make it out there. And it was just like, well, that's okay, because I'll catch him at the next one. And it was just, it was going to happen. And then that was the first thing when I woke up. I grabbed my phone, shut the alarm off, and for whatever reason started scrolling. And that was the first piece of news that I got Monday morning. I mean, my feet hadn't even hit the floor yet. And I was hit with that. And it just, you talk about sucking the wind out of your sails, but I mean, I didn't have any there to begin with. It just was like, boom. And there aren't many actors, I try not to let celebrity deaths, bother me, but there aren't many of them that hit the way that hit. And this for me was on par with like Harold Ramis or Leonard Nimoy, or, I mean, it was a big one. It left a gaping void. And it was just, not to mention all the Doctor Who stuff, the fact that, Cold War and The Big Finish, and he's a voice in Dreamland.
Yeah.
So that one hurt.
Something that
And
I
the Paul Sorvino was more just from the standpoint that he was planning. He was a guest that was supposed to come to Planet Comic Con a couple years back, and we were supposed to. He was on our list of well, since he's going to be here,
Mhm.
And I know that everybody knows him from Law and Order and Goodfellas and stuff like that. But for me, it's always
okay. I couldn't even tell you. I knew he was. He was familiar enough with me. I couldn't tell you a film that I had seen him in. That was one of my things. I have seen Goodfellas though, so I do remember him in that.
He's always the mobster, He's always that guy. But for me, it would have been the Rocketeer.
I forgot he was in that too.
I may not make an honest buck, but I'm 100% American, and I ain't working for no two-bit Nazi. That's one of my favorite bits from that movie is that speech that he gives. Oh, come on, Eddie. What's it matter? I pay you good money. Hey, look, and I get a little patriotic over the mobster telling off the Nazi. So the fact that we were supposed to have met the late great Paul Sorvino that was just kind of it was about noon. I had just started to kind of come out of my David Warner funk, and that one hit, and it was like, I'm just going to go home. If you need me, I will be in the pillow fort coloring because I do not want to adult the rest of the day. I'm just done. This day exacts a heavy toll.
I guess something I didn't realize until after this was that he and Lisa Barrowman were a couple.
David Warner and Lisa Barrowman?
Yeah, I guess taking it from the silence, you guys didn't realize that either.
Did not know that.
I knew his partner's name was Lisa. I didn't know it was Barrowman.
It is. In fact, I think, and they never talked much about their relationship. But from what I had read and gathered was they met doing recordings for Big Finish. So they've only been a couple for about 2 or 3 years, I guess. But yeah, they had met through Big Finish and became an item that way. So, yeah. I think it wasn't until some of the media reports came out talking about his partner.
They all say, who is Doctor Who?
Do you collect Doctor Who? Do you have Doctor Who items and you don't know you collect Doctor Who? For all things in the Doctor Who collecting world, tune in to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, a Direction Point Network podcast. I am Larry Van Rosbergen, your host, and I have been collecting Doctor Who for 40 years. With popular features like collection protection and the most outrageous offer, we have a lot of fun. Available anywhere you get your podcasts. You're listening to Traveling the Vortex, a Direction Point Network podcast.
Should we move on to some better news, though, which is, maybe for some, some may consider this not so good news, that Disney Plus Disney is in talks with the BBC to be the first getting the first line streaming rights to Doctor Who, presumably the 60th anniversary and beyond. So, and of course, there's little information coming out about that because we do know that they're in private talks. I think Forbes is who broke this, but the idea would be that they would presumably, whereas HBO Max carries the seasons, I think, so many months out from them actually airing, it sounds like Disney would be day and date, so that subscribers to Disney Plus would get to the episodes that way in order to help bolster their library as they're trying to get established content, I understand. And it also isn't clear whether it would be regionally based, whether it would be worldwide or whether it would be just certain parts of the country, because certain parts of the country or parts of the world do have different catalogs on Disney Plus than we do. And as a matter of fact, I think Australia doesn't even have Hulu. They have a section of their Disney Plus called Star that has all of their more adult focused content. So,
as I've said before, I, for one, welcome our corporate overlords. I'm in favor of anything that brings Who more exposure.
Yeah,
and I think Disney's a good fit for it.
I think Disney's a much better fit for it than HBO Max.
Yeah, quite honestly.
Although
strange as that sounds.
I think Disney Plus would probably have to offer a lot of money to uncouple the BBC from Warner Brothers, because they've had at least a partnership in distribution all the way back to the video days. That's how here in the U.S. or in the North American region, we would actually get our VHS and DVDs distributed was through Warner Brothers. And since Warner Brothers is who owns HBO, it would certainly take some decoupling in order to do that. But I think Disney has the money to do it, and I think that they certainly are, just from everything you read, in the market of not only new content but bolstering content that's already there and available and ready. And to bring now, it also doesn't mean we would get probably all the classic catalog, but it would be ideal if we did. It might be like HBO Max, where it's just from the 2005 relaunch on. I think the other thing that people are concerned about is there is a section of fans out there that are afraid of Disney-fying Doctor Who, and I think if it wasn't a brand new Bad Wolf helmed program come the 60th anniversary and on, I think that maybe those fears would be a little more valid. But I think that Disney really, their only stake in it would be to distribution. I don't think they want any say in how it goes, and I don't think Bad Wolf Productions would give them much more say other than, you can broadcast our show. So I think that those people that are afraid that Disney gets dips their toe in, that it's suddenly going to become Disney-fied, I think that's unfounded. I don't think we have to worry about that kind of thing.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a necessary concern.
I've seen several people concerned about the Disneyfication of it, and it's like, you guys know, I mean, we don't know, admittedly, but I imagine this is just distribution, and in no way, shape, or form is Disney making Doctor Who.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're not going to have any say in the product itself. They're simply going to be airing it. And that's why I think it's a good thing that it's going to, further the spread of the show. But time will tell. And, it may not be, I don't know if Disney would go so far as to demand an exclusive. It may just be that they want to be an additional outlet for it. So that if you're not an HBO Max subscriber, you could get it here as well. So maybe it'll be on both, kind of like, what movie? Well, Bob's Burgers. Obviously, that was probably a deal that was done maybe even before the Fox merger was complete. But I noticed that that's currently streaming on both HBO Max and Hulu.
The Bob's the deal
Bob's
with
Burgers movie.
The deal with HBO Max, I think, was prior to Disney purchase.
So it doesn't have to be necessarily exclusive, although I'm sure Disney would love for it to be exclusive. But yeah, I know, I'm in favor of it.
I'm trying to think if there's any non-Disney produced shows that are on Disney Plus. That are still ongoing.
Okay. I was just saying, you're not counting the Fox titles that they picked up.
No, I'm trying to think of ones that are continuing to be produced. 'Cause obviously, there's some that
I think
that are on there. But
the majority of that kind of stuff though is on Hulu. You're going to find on Hulu anyway. So.
Yeah,
they just picked up. They just announced that the Orville is all 3 seasons are moving over there, but that's one of the Fox titles that.
and that's on Hulu currently.
Hulu produced, so
an additional.
They have the distribution rights on that anyway, so they own the Orville.
Yes.
Yep. And Disney, if you're listening, we want a season 4.
I think as well as it's being received, Disney is not Netflix. They're not just going to cancel it for no reason. They'll listen. If it's doing well, they'll continue. As long as McFarlane wants to do it.
As long as he's involved, I think he said he'd willing to keep going if there's a want and a need for it.
Yeah.
So.
You are invited on an adventure across all of time and space, in a completely random order. It's the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. Jump in the TARDIS with your hosts
Eric Gulbranson,
Asad Kheshki,
and
Matthew Kressel.
explore Doctor Who TV stories, audio adventures, and books, both novels and non-fiction. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. It's the entire Whoniverse on shuffle. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast is a member of the Direction Point Network and is available about once a month wherever you find your podcasts. You are listening to Traveling the Vortex.
All right, well, should we move on to our reviews? This week we're doing the War Master Volume 1, Only the Good, which is, but we're doing parts 2, 3, and 4, because we already reviewed 1.
The Good Master. The Time War rages around Arkeen, a planet serving as a sanctuary for the sick and injured. But Arkeen is protected by a mysterious, powerful force. A force the Master will stop at nothing to harness, even if it turns itself against him.
Bump, bump. And then it kind of trailed off at the end.
Kind of like the story does.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a really good setup. It's a really good, intriguing story. I like now. I'm going to say this before we review all of these, because I think this does sort of color my perception of all of these different stories. But had I listened to this box set before listening to the other Master stories, I think maybe I would have come to this box set even more excited, or came away from it even more excited than I am. I'm not saying this is a bad box set by any means. I'm not saying these are bad stories, but I think that we did ourselves a disservice, unintentionally, by doing it doing it in such a way that we are staying chronological as opposed to release order. Because I think some of the stories now that we've heard with the War Master are much better War Master stories. They're better portrayals of the War Master. So when we get to this point, I think at the time that this was made, this would have been our War Master. This would have been what we understand as to be the War Master. But now I think that character has grown so much that it almost casts a different picture in these. And it's not until the very last one that I felt like we really kind of got the War Master that we've been experiencing through the rest of these stories. That said, I think that this is a great premise. I like the idea that the Master is, hiding out and pretending to be a doctor, although it's kind of a rehash of what we've had before, but he's, he's playing the pieces, so to speak, on this planet in order to get closer to this powerful force, whatever it is. And, the Daleks coming and saying, give up the Master, we know he's here. Him playing off the greed of the one main woman. I like the idea of a planet that has this powerful force that basically protects them. And that's why they've become a hospital planet, because nothing can happen to them. I think where it does fall down is when the Master decides he gets his group together and gets close enough to get it, then it's like it falls apart because he doesn't get it. It's like he kind of bumbles it, and then it just, this poor planet, now it doesn't have what it needs because it doesn't have this paradoxical force anymore. So it's like it falls off, and you're like, what was the whole point of this story? What was the point of this build up and this getting there to only just have it to kind of fall apart at the end? And that's what I didn't like about this one.
Yeah, same here. I like the idea of, the Master hiding out, trying to do something, and I wind up doing a lot of good on accident.
Right.
He does it.
Right.
That's a pretty clever idea. And it's also kind of, considering it's the first box set, it's a kind of a safe idea. It kind of puts him in doctor-like shoes where they're kind of tiptoeing about, okay, how bad do we want the Master to be? So it feels like a very safe War Master as far as the entire box set goes. And the resolution, it feels so, the whole thing is like, okay, so Cole grabs it and it's never really clear what exactly happens and why it stops. But it's like, oh, well, all of that was kind of for nothing. great.
Yeah. It just fizzles out. I mean, it's like somebody unplugged the thing. There's this mythical force, this mythical force that's stretched. It's a fixed point. It is stretched back through the eons from eternity, and it's been waiting for the master for this point in time. It knows it's coming. It's sentient. It knew it was coming for him. Cole touches it, and it goes away.
Yeah.
No
And
real explanation of how or why.
yeah, it just kind of stops. And the master's like, oh, yeah, of course that would happen. It's like, why?
Right.
And they kind of make some allusions to it being a bootstrap paradox, that it had to happen because it was going to happen.
Because it was set, yeah.
But there's not enough meat to that to really cement it in my mind as to why it had to happen.
Right.
And then the Daleks swoop in and destroy everything, and we're off and running onto, well, we've got to get out of here. And it's really unfortunate because I feel like the core mystery of the planet and the Master's goings on, I would have happily, even though I enjoyed all of that, I would have happily sacrificed some of the hospital stuff in order to explore the mystery of this planet a little bit more and give that some more oomph in order to satisfactorily resolve it at the end of the story.
Yeah.
And I just don't feel like we got it. And it's very frustrating because it was such a wonderful setup and a well-told story. And of course, again, Jacobi gives an amazing performance in this role. And what an interesting idea that of the two of them, that the Master has more basic medical knowledge than the Doctor. For all of the times that the Doctor has had to stop somebody and go, oh, no, I'm not that kind of doctor. You would think he would have accidentally picked some of it up by now just to be able to try and help some people.
Well, I think that's probably why, is because the Master's not afraid to get in there and get his hands dirty because he has very little scruples. And so if something happens, then, oh, well, he wipes his hands of it and moves on. Whereas the Doctor, I think, probably is a little more apprehensive. So he has always said, oh, I'm not that kind of doctor, and deferred to the medical experts, whereas the Master has no scruples. So it does make sense that the Doctor would have picked up more, or that the Master would have picked up more because of that.
But you would think even, field medicine, surely there's a class in the eons of wandering that the Doctor could have taken, that
well,
if he came across somebody in a wrecked spaceship and their spleen was hanging out, he could have done a little bit more than made them comfortable and boiled some tea.
I don't know what I mean? Yeah, I don't know about that, but let's also be fair that the Doctor has more medical knowledge when it serves the story too. There's been been occasions where he knows more than it's implied in another story. So,
but yeah,
it almost seems like it's one of those skills that some people just pick up and learn easily. The Master plays it off like, well, it's just rudimentary biology. It's just it's easy. It's like one of those things he just understands naturally.
Yeah.
How the body works and how to destroy it. And he knows how to fix it because he knows how to break it.
Plus,
I suppose that does fit very well with his previously established comments about you have to understand something in order to kill it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That I guess makes sense, that he would have done a thorough study of anatomy in order to know where to cut somebody's carotid artery or something.
And lest we forget too, he has spent a significant time with the Ronnie, who is a biologist, so he's probably picked up some stuff from that as well. Anything else about this one? I think what it does do, and it's not until the revelation later, but what it does do is it sets up Cole initially being rescued in order to further the paradoxical issue that happens later on. But we'll get there. The next one is the Skyman.
When his new companion decides to save a planet, the Master indulges this most futile of requests. Materializing on a primitive Agarian world, both the strangers quickly find their place in it, until fallout from the war invades their happy paradise.
Bum, bum, bum!
Really?
Oh man, did I love this one.
So this is Mondos 2.0. This is basically
pretty much.
this would have been the genesis of the Cybermen had they not already done the genesis of the Cybermen. This story felt like we've done this before. And I think the other thing that I don't like about this story is the fact that it's all Cole. There's and it makes sense why they do it this way, but it's this love story and this futile effort for Cole to try to save this society, these farmers, this group of farmers living on this planet, and it's nice as a love story, but it doesn't fit in this box set, and it does for the fact that you had to have Cole you had to have Cole inadvertently create this race that's going to be a problem, but it's not a master story. It's the master in the background, kind of, nudging him along. I can't do anything. I'm sorry. Oh, but there might be some things that in an unlocked shed out here that, you guys can. So he's nudging Cole in that direction constantly, but always from the background. And I am sort of glad now that they did the story that they did later, where we find out what the master's doing as Cole's off doing all of this stuff. That was neat. And I'm glad they came back and revisited that, because I think it gives this, knowing that now, this worked in reverse for what I was arguing earlier, but knowing that now kind of gives us a little more, it helps it out a little bit, I guess I should say. But I was
a nice companion piece.
Exactly. But I got very bored with something that I felt was very predictable. I sort of felt like I kept rooting for Cole, wanting him to find a cure, but as the story degrades into dire straits, I knew where it was going. About halfway in, I kind of knew where it was going. Now, I didn't know that they were taking the Cyberman route as much as they do until we kind of get to that point, but I really kind of felt like it was just a rehash of a story. It was the master who I'm listening to this box set for sidelined, and a romantic story that was decent, but I think the trappings could have been better. I think there could have been more originality around it. Let's just put it that way.
See, for me, it had such great supporting cast and characters, and was such a tragedy of a story that I was riveted the entire time. It would have been nice to have the master there more, but the way it was done had him just enough that I was like, every time I thought, oh, wait, we haven't heard from the master in a while, he popped back up. And so it was always oh, yep, there he is. Okay. And he's kind of, he almost, until you eventually learn what he was doing, between that last story and this one, through this entire box set, it almost seems like it's a softened master, that he's actually being kind to people through these two stories. And it's just, the approach to the character in this part 2 is absolutely fascinating, in my opinion, just because it's such a different approach to seeing this character, how differently than we normally see it.
Yeah, I concur. I for me, and maybe I'm just a softie, but I loved the romance. I fell hard for these two, and Cole being such a a wet behind the ears noob at world saving, and he's so out of his depth. And when he makes this grand statement, yes, I've come from the sky and I'm going to save your planet, it's like, dude, you don't open with that. Come on. Just what and they take him in anyway. They're like, well, come on, come have some mead, and we'll find out. And he kind of makes a mess of things, but he fixes it, and then goes through the motions of the pump and the bridge and gets to know these people. And I was just there for it. I was like, this is a wonderful story. And yeah, I mean, Glenn's right. Nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens throughout this. It's just the lives of these people in this village and how Cole interacts with them. But man, I was there for it. I just was absolutely riveted to the goings on of, I could have spent another week listening to, how many sheep we lost in the drought and everything.
what he was going to screw up trying, or what they were going to get mad at him for him trying to improve next.
Yeah, I mean, it was just this. I hesitate to use the term comedy of errors because it certainly wasn't. It was an absolute tragedy, and him and Elise, and how he struggled to just try and do something right, and I didn't make the connection at all. It didn't feel familiar to me at all. And the master showing up and doing his thing, it was like, what is your deal? What is you're being very hands off, which I get. And you're going to let Cole fall on his face, which I get. Those are very master things. But I don't understand quite why, other than the vineyard, connection. What is your ultimate end goal here? And I still think it would have been nice if we'd kind of had a more pointed, this is when the master decides to take a break from the time war, kind of, setup for things. But beyond that, the fact that he's not there and he's letting Cole take the fall for the, everything that Cole sets up and does on his own. I'm fine with the fact that he was kind of, we've had Dr. Light stories. Well, this is a Master Light story. I'm fine with that. When we eventually get to the, it's a containment suit and it's going to keep you safe. I'm like, okay, but how's that going to work? And you just, dude, you're kind of sentencing these people to imprisonment in a weird way. And then he leaves. He encases her in the suit and leaves, and she's being doped up with this, it'll calm you down. And I'm like, man, this suit thinks of everything. And it wasn't until, they self-replicate. Okay, cool. It was not until he gets to the master and they come clomping down the road. I was like, oh, wow. It's an alternate Cyberman origin story. And that tickled me like, yeah, I was over the moon for it. I was like, yeah, okay, you were like a 10. Now you're an 11. That's so cool. And I don't even care that it's Mondo's 2.0. I don't care. This is great.
They skirt it away just far enough that, yeah, it's essentially the Cybermen. But I mean, how many times have we seen this story in science fiction in general? So it's not like Cybermen have the monopoly on this idea either.
We went right up to the line without.
Yeah, I don't hate the story. I just don't think it was that great. In fact, to me, it's close to the weakest one for me. Just because I was bored.
I thoroughly enjoyed the ride of it all.
Yeah. Now, I disagree. I think it's not that I heard your point, but I disagree with it. Just as Keith said, the Cybermen don't necessarily have a monopoly on the idea of we've had Robo-Men, we've had zombies, we've had. I mean, there are numerous kind of emotionless android people in the galaxy, and so. Anything is possible, and the fact that we walked right up to that line but didn't cross over it, it was clever enough done that I was totally okay with it, and didn't step on any toes. And even if they had come out and said, "Oh, these are Cybermen," we've had Pete's World Cybermen. We've had alternate universe Cybermen. We're on yet another planet that's being impacted by the Time War at this point. So it's very easily retconned.
The show proper has given us two different origin stories.
Yeah. I mean,
on screen.
it's just here's yet another what if. And, the master seems to be like, oh, wow. You kind of screwed the pooch there, didn't you, Cole?
Well, hey,
come and get away.
He was feeding it, though. I think that to me is another strike against it, because not only has it been done in Doctor Who before, it's been done in science fiction. So it feels even more to me like a rehash. And let's get some originality. Let's do something a little different, not something that we're retreading. It's a poor excuse to say, well, it's not the first time that they've done it. It's not even the second time they've done it. Well, that's not a good excuse for it to be good.
But I've never seen it done this way.
Okay.
I've not.
We'll we'll have to agree to disagree. Well, we've seen the same Doctor Who stories, so I'm pretty sure you have, from my opinion. But
Not from a love angle, trying to save, you know, the woman you love and turning her into this monstrosity.
you don't think
Not in Doctor
you
Who.
don't think that Spare Parts? Now, it wasn't a love story, but you don't think Spare Parts was the same passion to save a race of people for the same reasons? I mean, it wasn't a romantic love story that was the cause, but it was certainly love of their own civilization, their own mankind. I mean, it's
Spare Parts was done on
thing.
such a bigger scale, though, that it doesn't feel the same to me at all. Spare Parts has an entire planet, scope to it at stake, and so no. It doesn't have the same feel at all for me, and the
If
fact
anything,
that
it's closer to the Bill two-parter.
Oh, there you go. See, you're
Yeah.
not helping sell me on this
Yeah,
because you're
Keith, go ahead.
exactly right. It is much more on the scale of that. And as a matter of fact, what makes that even worse is they did that again, and that is a Cyberman story. So that's like a third attempt at a different way of presenting the Cybermen. Now, in this one, they don't go as far to say they are, and I'm not saying that they are. I'm just saying that you're not helping.
Now, I think Spare Parts gets a pass because it is clearly meant to be the origin
genesis, yeah.
of the Cybermen.
Sure, I agree.
And so that is kind of, it's the established canon in my head.
Yeah, I agree
and so
with you.
this is an offshoot, so it's different. But it's a similar story. But even if it was the Daleks, we've had multiple versions of that throughout the years.
Yeah,
and we've had a master story where he went and monkeyed with it and did it. So it's kind of just yet another in that line. But this one just had a unique enough take on it. And like I said, I'm a sucker for a love story. I like romantic comedies. I like romances. And this one, I bit hard into the life of Cole and his woman and was rooting for him, even though I knew it was doomed from the get-go. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was worthwhile.
Well,
And considering where the story goes, you can almost do some hand waving and make it be Cybermen still.
Yeah,
that would make it worse.
Considering how it ends.
Well,
how the entire box set ends.
Well, let's move into the next one because I just want to see your guys' interpretation of this next one. So let's start this one.
The Heavenly Paradigm. With his plans approaching fruition, the Master travels to Stamford Bridge in the 1970s, a location he believes might hold the key to his success. But what terrible secrets lurk under the stairs of number 24 Marigold Lane, and what sacrifices will the Master make in the name of ultimate victory?
Okay, so this one I think has a very, very strong open.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has a very strong middle.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has a kind of weak climax, and then it has a very strong ending. So it's a bump.
I'll let you go first because I think I'm kind of in the same boat with the exception of the last point, but there's a caveat to that. So go ahead.
The idea that the Time Lords have this weapons locker, for lack of a better term, stashed on Earth of all places, is cool. It's not the first time that we've done that. I almost expected Hand of Omega possibly to make an appearance, but was kind of glad that we didn't go there. I liked the old lady being a time agent, and the interactions of everything, and the computer being just self-aware enough to cause problems, but not quite self-aware enough to actually be evil. All of that was fun and delightful. I like that we finally got the turn that the Master reveals, this is what I've been after all along. And of course, Cole has to be sacrificed. That's why I've been dragging him along through all this, because
and why he's so important to me.
Why he's so important. And Cole, this is another thing that the box set, I think, falls down a little bit on, is that realistically, Cole has become the Master's Charlie.
Yeah.
that with Charlie, when the doctor inadvertently saved her and suddenly has this paradoxical companion, it's this big, oh God, what do I do? And with the master, it's like, okay. Because he is so not concerned about the web of time. Now, maybe it's because of the time war that everything is in shreds and tatters, that it's just a moot point at this point. But maybe it's because of his, the wiring in his head is like, I could care less if this causes problems, at worst.
Use this to my advantage.
Exactly. Good night, Wesley. At most I can kill you in the morning. So he's going to move on with it. So the fact that he's got this master plan to sacrifice Cole and plug him into the machine and use the paradox nature of him to then rewrite the universe thanks to this wonderful algorithm. And I'm surprised there weren't references to the CIA, because this totally sounds like something they would have come up with. It's like, okay, cool. I can get on board with this. This is really nifty. And the heavenly paradigm. What an awesome name. And even the rationale for why it wasn't used. When Cole and the old lady are talking and she's like, but you're living your best life. Why wouldn't you use it? But are you really? And kind of the realization that, oh, I'm not really, it's like, do I still have free will at that point? Because yeah, I'm living a great life, but all of the decisions are being made for me. Is it so great at that point? Even I could see the argument to that one. As much as I would like that life, I'm kind of like, yeah, well, maybe that would kind of suck if you were aware of it. So, all of that was just top notch. And then, we get a little back and forth with her and the master, and it doesn't work, and then it does, and okay, and he wins. He gets a W, and the machine turns on and does its thing and makes things way worse than he anticipated, which, oh wow, who didn't see that coming? Come on. Really? Master is so limited in his thinking sometimes. Okay. And that I think is the part
that's part of his MO in general, though. So
yeah,
it's not out of character.
It's not out of character. It just, I don't know. I almost think it would have. I almost think I'd have been better served in the story if he hadn't stopped her and it had been focused in and destroyed just her, as opposed to actually impacting the rest of the universe. Because that to me would have been, oh, you were foiled at the last minute, as opposed to you won and screwed it up yourself.
Yeah.
Because the master is such a fun character to root for, that when he fails and it's his fault, that you kind of feel like, well, shame on me for thinking this was going to go well. So you share an equal part of the failure in some ways as a listener. And it's frustrating because you I mean, obviously he's the bad guy, so we don't want to root for him, and yet we are rooting for him. And so the home team has now lost again. I imagine it's like being a Washington Generals fan and going to all of the Globetrotter games and just going, man, we just can't catch a break. I mean, every now and then you get one, but for the most part, it's just the longest losing streak in history. And you're like, well, maybe next time, guys. So there's that kind of stigma attached to it. And so then when he decides, enough of that.
Before we move to that, let me just, because I'm going to really get this in here.
Go for it. I've been talking a lot.
But the reason I say this is because I agree with everything you've said up until this point. I completely agree with you. I think my only niggle with this is the fact that the crux of this story is that the master wants to bring peace, and it's too much for the machine. So what's the point of this machine if it can't handle peace? If it can't handle ultimate peace, to be
on the large scale that he's using it is the thing.
And I think that, well, and that's just it. How large of a scale does a machine that rewrites the universe have to be. That's my point, is they drive it home that it sort of rewrites everything. So why can something be too much for it? I think that was my issue with it.
I didn't get the impression that it rewrote the entire universe until the master did his fiddling with it, that it would just rewrite somebody's life, essentially, and it would only be within the scope of one person's life that it would rewrite things and make it so that their life goes the way, the easy way it should to make things better.
Okay.
I was under the impression that you
scope
could
of the
use it for
entire
planet,
universe.
that you could use it for an entire planet or an entire society, that would work fine. But the rationale behind it, that, well, does that, if this society is great, then surely another society somewhere else is failing because of it.
So my problem with it not being a rewrite the universe and just rewrite the individual is it kind of does make the argument that, number one, it's a weapon, because if it's just going to happen for one person, what does that matter unless you're using it on the one person that's the cause for a problem? Then I suppose it could. But if you're going to use it for one person, then how is this a powerful weapon? I mean, it does make a lot of changes for somebody, makes things go better for them, or makes things go different for somebody else. But that's not a good enough weapon for it to be a... Now, granted, I know what you're saying. He pushed it too far because he was going to use it against the Time Lords. But why are the only argument then is the discussion that that he and the time agent lady have a discussion about, well, would you really want to use it because, or the reason we don't use it is because, would you really want to strip yourself of that free will if this is the way things are supposed to happen? So my impression was, don't use it because it kind of strips free will from everybody except for the person that has molded the universe in the way that they want it to be done. So that's what strips the agency, but it doesn't strip the agency for just one person. It strips that agency for everyone. And so It doesn't make any sense to me why you would have that conversation if it was just affecting one people, or even a smaller amount of people, say a planet, as Sean's trying to argue, which I'm a little more on board with that it's a little larger scale. But it really got
they do talk about wanting to use it on Skaro to redo the timeline.
I got the impression that it was a larger scope. So I kind of felt like overloading it seemed like too much or too easy of an out. And that's the other thing that I don't like about it, is the fact that the only mistake that the master makes is he gives it too much to cope with. That's not really a mistake on the master when you kind of are serving up the idea of how this thing works. Then it should work the way that you're trying to make it work. So then it becomes accidental. Instead of the master, bumbling and causing a problem, it becomes just a complete accident. And so that strips the agency of the ending of the story. I wanted the computer to intervene. I wanted Cole to somehow miraculously come back. I'm kind of glad that he didn't, because I think that his journey ending the way that it does, the sacrifice that the master uses, or the way the master sacrifices him, I think would have been undone if he'd have come back. But I just sort of wanted something else to thwart the master rather than dumb accidental luck, And so I think that's why I struggle with this part.
Well, it's the problem is the MacGuffin itself, the fact that this thing is an algorithm. Okay, that to me says math. That we've written a program that's going to do this thing. And now you're telling me that once we plugged it in and turned it on, and the computer even says, well, the universe is a big place. Okay, but it's still math. There's still infinite numbers that it should be able to handle this, right? So now you're telling me that the math doesn't work. And I kind of have issue with that, because that now that I think is where it falls down, is the one thing that it's supposed to do, it doesn't do.
I think you're stating it much better than I was, Sean. That's what I agree with. Yeah.
So yeah, you have broken the thing. Mm-hmm. It's not that we decided it's a bad idea. It's that it's broken. Mm-hmm. we could have just led with that.
Well, and even if they had, hinted that, this thing has been broken and this is why it's in this archive instead of being used somewhere, I would be more okay with, the fact that it goes wrong for the master because he didn't maybe know it was broken and tried to use it.
That would have been better, yeah. and it would make
Honestly,
more sense.
You're right. That would make more sense because then it is the master's fault and it's his hubris that
exactly.
my calculations can fix it.
Right.
And then the computer can come back with, well, the universe is a big place. I mean, okay, that I can buy. I can swallow that one a little better.
And it also makes more sense for why that thing is here in a weapons store rather than in that big vault that's holding the moment on Gallifrey and many other dangerous weapons. It makes that was the other thing that I had a problem with is why do we have this where supposedly all the best weapons are stored? I don't know where they called it, the Vault of Rassilon, or where the Omega Arsenal, I think is what they call it.
Arsenal, yeah.
So the Omega Arsenal, this is like the baddest of all bad things. And then you've got this thing that you're making out to be a big thing on a weapons store on Earth. And so had they sort of, the way you were framing it, Keith, I think that would have worked for me better that it was there, because it made sense that, well, that's why we've kind of put it away, because it's no longer worthy of the arsenal because of the fact that there's a flaw. That would have worked better.
Maybe that was the intent. Maybe
it didn't come across.
This is all kinds of stuff that could have been written into this story that would have made it better.
We tend to do that, though. We tend to find. We tend to not only find flaws, but then we try to rewrite it to make it better.
Yeah, but maybe okay. Well, this was actually it was supposed to be in the Omega Archive, and we moved it over here at a much softer target, so that the Daleks would find it and they would turn it on and try to use it, and it would have blown them up because the math doesn't work.
It wouldn't have worked.
I do think that the nugget of the machine actually saving planets that ended up empowering the Daleks works. I think that's an interesting device within this going wrong. It's just the fact that it's going wrong is what I have a problem with.
And I kind of once, okay, so the master did this and made all these changes to planets. Now I want to explore the ramifications of this. I know we get some references to, before this, the Daleks didn't get control of the cruciform, which we obviously know they did, and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of other stuff that they referenced that I would have been intrigued to explore, the ramifications of the changes, plus any ones that they didn't mention that could have happened out there because of this. But I don't think we ever get any of that anywhere.
No. And this is supposed to effectively take care of the problem that Cole set in place, but it's never made clear that is one of the things that's wiped away before the master kind of retreats or the machine breaks down or whatever. It's not made clear enough that that's been stopped. So I suppose that leaves that little dangling thread out there for somebody to pick up later if they need to. But then again, it's just another, now at this point, it's even worse because now it's just another cyber race out there. I don't know.
It is just another version of, the Cybermen.
Right. So here's what, and I think I'm going to let Sean go on because I stopped him in the middle. Keith, unless you have something else to add, I think that I'm going to let Sean say his piece about the end because I think we may be on the same page, but for different reasons.
Well, then the master's like, oh, well, okay, this sucks. Time for me to run away. And he brings out the chameleon arch with the fob watch, and he's going to, get to where we eventually find him as Professor Yana. And
no, he reverts to a child before we get there. Is that what you mean? Just the setup to get us to there. Okay.
The arch and then goes to be a child.
Yes.
Right?
Okay. Gotcha.
The long way around.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that you weren't implying that right after this is the honest story because there's a lot of time.
No.
Okay.
There's several years, but
carry on.
Yeah. So it's a nice dovetailing into, the familiar waters of where he's going to wind up. And, kind of a farewell, if you will, to the War Master. And I thought that was, okay, cool. At least there's a rationale for why, the fact that, well, I can't do any more damage around this popsicle stand. Quite literally. that's a good reason to go hide at the end of the universe on top of the time war. That not only did you screw it up, but not only was there a time war, not only was it bad, but you made it worse. Okay, I can buy that. And so that kind of redeemed the story for me a little bit. And I liked that ending of it. Although I was a little sad that to come to the end of Jacobi. But
well, as much as I liked the ending of yes, it dovetailed and fit perfectly, it didn't feel like everything leading up to it was momentous as I thought it should have been.
I would agree with that too.
That is
it
my
felt like a bigger thing should have happened to make him go onto the end of the universe.
Yes. Now, that being said, had this been the only thing we experienced from the beginning, if we'd have just listened to this, I'm talking about when this was released, unknowing that there were going to be more Jacobi War Master stories, this probably would have been more satisfactory to us, because this is what we would have gotten and this is what we have known. But I agree. I think it's sort of, I love the satisfaction of knowing, of putting those final pieces in place. But I'm with you, Keith. I feel like there should have been an even bigger buildup before we got to this point. And so it would have, now having listened to all the rest of the stories that we've listened to, it does kind of cheapen the reason why he goes to this. And I am glad that we had the baby crying in the background, and it's implied that he's started, because it has to fit with the comment, I think, in Utopia, where he talks about was found as a baby on the coast of the Silver Devastation. Yeah, so it does work with that, and it does, because that was my thought. I thought, okay, we have the War Master this whole time at the age that he is when he's Yana, but I had that in the back of my mind going, but he has to revert to a child at some point. So they did make that work here.
I don't know if I agree with you, though, that this would have been satisfying, because I think had we come into this, and because if you look at the whole box set, the 4 stories, even though we're only reviewing the 3 of them tonight, but if you had looked at the 4, we started with Beneath the Viscoid, where he's on the run from the Daleks and hiding underwater.
Yeah.
And he's really kind of not the War Master that we eventually get, because he's on the run. He's being pursued. He's being hunted. And then you get the good War Master in the next one. And then you get an absent War Master in the third one. And it's not until you get the final one that he kind of shows up as the War Master. So of a 4-story box set, you really are only getting one War Master story out of it, where he's, kind of legit in War Master mode, as it were.
Well,
so I don't know that we would have been
War Master mode.
Yeah, very much so.
Why
that doesn't work, though, is because why that explanation doesn't work is because the reason why this would have been more satisfying is because this is if you just listen to these 4 stories, this is where the stakes are the greatest. And so it works into the fact that he runs from it and decides I'm going to use this chameleon arch and go on, because this is the highest that the stakes are taken to for the Master up to this point that we know of. And so it does work, but because the stakes have been even higher in previous stories that we've listened to, it sort of brings this one down to where it isn't satisfactory, because we've set the bar higher, we've set the stakes higher, we've set the epicness of the finales much higher than this one ends up being. But had this
part I understand, yeah.
But this is the highest stakes that we've had up to this point, if we've just started with this one and have no knowledge of anything else coming.
I get where you're coming from. I think what I mean is that had we listened to just this set and this was all we were familiar with, our complaint probably would have been, man, I was
not
really
enough
looking
Master.
forward to some War Master, and we didn't get any War
Yeah.
Master. I think would have been where, I was really looking forward to some War Master story. What was this? Why was he hiding the whole time? So
I can
we'd have found something to complain about.
I can see that perspective, and I think you're probably right in a way. But also from that perspective, I was at the time very surprised that they got Jacobi. Although I should have been, because they got John Hurt. But I was really surprised that they got Jacobi to come back and reprise that role. And so I think just knowing that it was maybe a fluke that happened, then I probably would have done I'm satisfied with what we did finally get more of the War Master. So from that perspective, maybe it would have been a little more sacrifice. It's hard to say. I mean, hindsight's 2020.
Even in even though I didn't think the resolution was a big enough issue to make him go run away, in the context of the War Master, of what we have listened to and the order we did listen to them in, the War Master, especially in these last 3 stories, felt like he was tired and he was done.
That's a good point.
So
that's a good point.
Even though he was trying to get this machine, because he's trying to actually stop the war.
Yeah.
I mean, he may be trying to rework the universe to be in a better of his image, but he's still trying to put a stop to the war.
Yeah.
So he is done with this war at this point.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
It's a good point.
It almost comes across as, you know what, this is all going wrong. F it, I'm leaving. I'm going to go hide till this is all over.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Valid point.
All right.
In the context of the entire box set, I'm okay with it. I still wish the tipping point was higher.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you're right.
Hello, fellow time travelers, and welcome to the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the only podcast to discuss, in story order, all the Doctor Who novelizations. My name is Tony Whitt, and every 2 weeks or so, I'm joined by a 2 to 3 person discussion panel, including our so-called expert who's been a Who fan since 1979. That would be me. We also get the views of intermediate, casual, and novice fans who either have never seen the show or who have never read these books until these podcasts, including
Dalton Hughes
and
Alison Fitz-Seyfried.
You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you find good podcasts, or even ones like ours. You're listening to Traveling the Vortex, a Direction Point podcast.
All right, Sean, what do we got coming up on the schedule?
Well, this ends Act 1, officially, of the Time War. So we will be taking a short break. Next time we come back, we are going to be reviewing the sidestep, kind of, sort of canonical podcast, Doctor Who Redacted, which is an audio drama in podcast form.
And so, it's not. It's an audio drama.
Not.
Yeah.
They release it on a podcast platform.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's released as a podcast platform. It's not the traditional podcast. It's basically an audio drama.
It's an audio drama. So we'll be listening to reviewing that. How many parts is it? 10?
10 parts, yep.
All 10 parts the next time. And then coming back with Act 2 of the Time War as we continue working our way through this wibbly-wobbly monstrosity this year with short trips, all hands on deck, and Time War, Susan's War, followed by some Eighth Doctor finally making an appearance officially.
Some substantial appearance.
Not just a guest spot, but an actual appearance. With the first, 4 box sets of the Eighth Doctor, Time War 1, 2, 3, and 4, along with short trips hard on both sides. So that kind of takes you out through, probably, I don't know.
Probably
September.
close. Yeah, probably further than that. Yeah, probably further than that. So we'll return to our bi-weekly schedule. So, well, that'll probably take us out to the end. That'll probably take us out until the end of the year, to be honest with you. All right. Well, be sure to check out our website, Traveling Vortex, for any updates on the podcast. And if you get any value out of this podcast, why not consider putting some value back into it? You can do that by clicking on the Patreon link on our website and consider supporting us. Also, please consider giving us a 5-star review wherever you subscribe to the podcast. It helps bump us up in the ratings and the recommendations. And make sure you join in on the conversation in our listeners forum on Facebook. That's going to do it for this time. Until next time, I'm Glenn.
I'm Sean.
I'm Keith.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Be seeing you.
Thanks for listening.
You have been listening to Traveling the Vortex. Doctor Who and all of its associated programs are owned and trademarked by the BBC. No infringement is intended or implied.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.